to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Mr. Zindler. You know, different technologies have different demands for critical materials. We're talking about a lot of electric cars, which will take a lot of batteries, obviously. We're talking about using battery storage for to deal with the intermittency of renewable energy. And I'm wondering whether we should be making strategic decisions about which nascent technologies to support, given the amount of critical minerals they demand. So in particular, should we be looking more aggressively at hydrogen for large vehicles and for buses? Should we be looking more aggressively at things like advanced nuclear for power generation, because we may not be able to get all the batteries that we need for storage? What do you think about the direction we should be taking with respect to that scarcity?
So it's a good question, and you know, we used to hear a lot more about an all of the above energy strategy, I think, than we do now, even frankly, even from Republicans, and yet it does seem like that we really have major challenges in the short and the long term if we think about this transition. And longer term, you potentially do need technologies like advanced nuclear reactors. You need technologies like hydrogen to be used in various ways. And like I said earlier, that's why, at least to me, is encouraging that some of these are well supported in the infrastructure bill that passed recently. But you also need to support technologies that are more viable today. But as Mr. Pugliaresi points out, I mean, you know, these industrial processes, there is no easy fix. And this is why hydrogen, for instance, or advanced nuclear is important to try to find ways to decarbonize those areas as well. But in addition, there should be support for the technologies that are viable today. And I would note really that they are viable, and we can pretend that that there isn't competition here, but the reality is that the number of electric vehicles that are being sold around the world has been surging, particularly this year. And I would argue that it's not just because there's policy support, though there's been that, but it's also because ultimately these are superior products. So you can bury your head in the sand and say we just like internal combustion engine vehicles, but eventually there will be a transition.
I think you're starting to address a different point. I mean, obviously, my concern grows out of the popularity of electric vehicles, out of the commitment of the laudable commitment of our automakers to sell only electric vehicles, California only electric vehicles after 2035. So it's our only emission-free vehicles. So I just think, I suspect we should be giving some thought to the effect of scarcity if battery technology doesn't change in particular. Let me also ask you, so critical minerals are obviously complex problem. In addition to the potential of onshoring recycling, it seems like we should be working with our allies to develop new mines and factories for clean energy technologies in more favorable locations. Like when we utilize the U.S. Export-Import Bank to help develop the world's liquefied natural gas market, can the U.S. collaborate with its allies to create more secure and sustainable supply chains for critical minerals and low carbon technologies? In other words, if we can't have it here, onshore it, can we friendshore it?
I think the answer is yes. And I mean, if you look at where the production of a lot of these elements are, both where they are and where they could be, it's a pretty heterogeneous group of countries. But if you look at where a lot of the refining of the elements takes place, the majority of it is in China. And so that's one area where you could say you would immediately potentially want to diversify so that you have a greater, less reliance on these elements making a stop in China before they proceed along the value chain. And that certainly is potentially an area that our foreign development agencies could look at. But the refining itself, to be clear, is something that can also be done in the United States. That's not contingent on a local resource of something under the ground.
All right. Thank you very much for being here. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr.